Okay, let's get started. Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a really great workshop ahead of us with Arthur Dave Miller as our facilitator. Just a few housekeeping rules. Feel free to put any questions you have in the chat bar or into the Q&A section. Just in case people have comments or anything to add, I would suggest using the Q&A section so that it doesn't get lost. We'll be taking questions either as we go or at the end, but I'll be just watching the chat there so that we can flag those out. Otherwise, yeah, let's get started. So with us today, we have Arthur Dave Miller, who is a 48-old, sorry, I can't speak English today. Who is a 48-year-old Mi'kmaq sexual health activist, educator, and motivational speaker with over 15 years experience working with and supporting many service organizations across Canada in both paid and volunteered capacities. His work spans global organizations who are most focused on research and community engagement. Dave is a community builder, a fun, free-spirited guy who serves his communities in whatever way he can. So we're very lucky to have you today, Dave. Thank you so much for joining. I will share the slides here and we can get started. Just give me a second. Okay. Can you see the slides okay?
I can see them. Yep.
Okay, awesome. Over to
Everyone else
you.
can see them. Thank you very much, and thanks for having me today. This workshop is I love this workshop because it really gives a lot of information out there, and I'm all about creating a safe space and allowing people to ask questions if they like. So please feel free if you do have questions to. I think we can type them in the chat there, and we'll get those answered. Thanks very much for that great introduction. Right now, currently, I work with Dalhousie. I'm spearheading a project called the Indigenous Boys and Men's Masculinity Project, where it's exploring where Indigenous boys and men get their guidance. So do they talk to their aunties or their parents or their guardians? And this is an ongoing project that's been going on for about 5 years. I work in the Sexual Health and Gender Lab there at Dalhousie University. But previously, I was with Healing Our Nations for almost 15 years in volunteer and in paid capacity. And somebody just asked if we'll have the slides available after the presentation, and I can send those over to the team at Digital Nova Scotia, and they can send them out, I imagine. Yeah, first question out of the way. That's great. Just a couple quick things before we get rolling here. If you don't ask questions, it could be a very boring presentation. I really guide my presentations around what people want to learn, opposed to standing up and talking about something that nobody wants to hear about. I find that people retain the information a lot better that way. And so really, we're just going to have a good conversation today here, hopefully. A little different for me, this setup. I can't see anybody. But anyhow, nonetheless, we're here. And so we're going to talk today about understanding First Nations in Atlantic Canada. And this lovely person here, this picture on the first slide is Nora Bernard from Millbrook First Nation. And she actually started the residential school survivor case in the courts. She's no longer with us. And she wasn't, it's a shame that she wasn't able to be with us when she won that case. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview. We're going to talk about Indigenous people, and we're going to talk about residential schools and teachings, traditions, medicines, health concerns, and where we are today. One of the things that I will also say is I don't know everything. I like to think I do. But this is all a learning experience for everybody. So if we come across a question that I don't know the answer to, I may not know it, but I guarantee you 100% I know somebody that does have the answer. So it goes back to learning something new every day. We can go to the next slide. So the Indigenous peoples in Atlantic Canada, you have the Mi'kmaq people, Maliseet, Métis, Innu, and Inuit. Um, and then there's status versus non-status. So we're talking about people that are living in the reserve or in the community, and then the Beothuk, and they are extinct due to interaction with Europeans. Next slide, please. So the Wabanaki Confederacy consisted of the following groups of Indigenous people: the Mi'kmaq, the Maliseet, Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, and Abenaki. This area included Eastern North America, so it's everything on the east, up the eastern coast. Just trying to keep an eye on the question right there. So these are some interesting facts you may or may not know. In 1956, Mi'kmaq became citizens of Canada. And in 1985, Mi'kmaq women whose status was taken away back by marrying a non-Indigenous person were granted their status back, and that was Bill C-31. Next slide, please. This is some history here. We'll touch on the dates here, but sorry, I just had another point, but I lost it. It'll come back. So 8,400 BC, Mi'kmaq encampment site at Debert, Nova Scotia, was created in 2000 BC. Mi'kmaq building stone eowars in Kejimkujik. 500 BC, Augustine Mound built near Red Bank, New Brunswick, sorry. So that's up the Miramichi Way. The name of the community is actually Metapatagia, sorry. 300 BC, the earliest identifiable Mi'kmaq campsites in Kejimkujik. 1200, earliest identifiable Mi'kmaq petroglyphs at Kejimkujik. In 1620, the census put Mi'kmaq at 4,000 compared to 35,000 estimated at pre-contact. So in 1749, Governor Edward Cornwallis, founder of Halifax, put a bounty on the head of every Mi'kmaq man, woman, and child. In 1752, English proposed a new peace treaty after realizing they cannot stop the Mi'kmaq people, or the Mi'kmaq raid, sorry. In 1801, Nova Scotia government creates 10 reserves. We actually have 15 now. Next slide, please. In 1868, the Indian Act was created. In 1901, Mi'kmaq flag was raised for the first time in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And in 1930, residential school in Shubenacadie opened. And in 1956, the Canadian government grants citizenship to Indigenous. In 1960, Canada governments grant Indigenous to vote in elections. So it's not that long ago when you're looking at these dates. I mean, 1960 sounds like it's a while ago, but it's not that long ago. In 1967, the residential school in Shubenacadie closed. And in 1986, Treaty Day, which is just passed, October 1st, was established. And in 1996, June 21st, that's recognized as Indigenous Day. Next slide. Any questions so far? Not missing anything here? Okay. In between 1920 and 1996, that's when the residential schools were operating. In 1920, and here's a quote here from Dr. Duncan Campbell Scott: "I want to get rid of the Indian population. I do not think, as a matter of fact, that the country ought to continuously protect a class of people who are able to stand alone. Our objective is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that is not being absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question and no Indian department that is the whole object of this bill. That's pretty disturbing, and so it's actually hard to read. Next slide, please. Continuing on in the residential school, in 1929, the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School opens its doors, but closed in 1966 and burned down in 1968. And between 3,000 and 5,000 children were taking to school, some children as young as 4 years old. Boys and girls were kept separate. Brothers and sisters that were not allowed to communicate within the school. They had to speak English. There was lots of sexual, physical, and emotional abuse that went on in these schools. We're not going to touch on those stories. I know we're all aware, or should be aware, of what happened in these residential schools. Next slide. There's a few, I'll touch on a few, but the residential school experiences, these were some of the quotes, but one here in particular: during the first 5 years of residential school, I cannot remember talking, feeling, crying, or even growing, says Knockwood. My life flatlined. Those are pretty, that's a pretty powerful quote there. I'll let you read the other two there, and we'll just I'll just leave that up for 1 second. I'm sorry, I just have to grab my glass of water here. One moment, sorry. There, that's better. Sorry about that. Never fails when you're in the middle. You can dry mouth. Do we have any questions so far? You want to just pause there at that slide and just if there are any questions? No?
No questions yet. No.
Okay, very good.
I guess I'll take this moment just to say, if anyone would like access to their mic, feel free to use the raise hand feature, and I can unmute you if that would be easier than trying to type. I know it can take a little time to get typing a question in there.
That's great. Thank you. Did we lose this slide? Seeing it here. Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. We can move to the next slide. So these are the numbers of residential schools where they were and how many there were. In BC, there were 17 of them. In Alberta, there were 27 residential schools. In Ontario, 20. Manitoba, there were 15. The Yukon, 3. And in Nova Scotia, we had 1 for all of the Atlantic region, including Newfoundland. And there's just a few pictures there at the bottom. Oh, there we go. Yeah. That's a picture, well, right underneath where it says residential school there. That's the one in Shuby, I believe. We can go to the next slide, thanks. So what were some of the losses? What did people experience in residential schooling? You know, they lost respect for themselves and others. Their self-esteem was damaged, and their self-worth. They lost their power. There were no boundaries: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, sexual. There was no trust was lost. Oral history through storytelling was lost. The language was definitely lost. People were separated from their parents and their other relatives, their ways of learning. Security and safety was lost. And that whole sense of community coming together. Um, you know that we talk about it taking a community to raise a child, and that was lost. Uh, Roles of parents and elders, that was all lost. Traditional teaching, hunting and gathering, the ability to say no was lost. The right to belong to a group or community or family was lost. Traditional ceremonies, rituals, healing practices, and medicines, that was all lost. I mean, anything to do with any culture or anything was just wiped away. Hair was cut. There were stories of a physical abuse if people spoke their language. Next slide, please. So this was some of the effects from all of that. So the trust, right? There's not a lot of trust in doctors and police and churches and schools or politicians. That trust was all lost in education, the academic education, awareness, and prevention. It affected people's families, their parents, their grandparents, their community. Uh, we talk about relationships. We're not just talking about immediate family, but the relationships that people have with the world, basically. And it really affected culture, um, in terms of being able to drum and going to powwows. And we'll talk about some of these ceremonies like smudging and dancing and language. I mean, I know a few aunts that really just in the past little while have started using their language again, because when they went through the schooling, it had such a negative impact on their lives that they wouldn't speak the language. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about some lighter stuff now, but that's the residential schooling, sort of in a nutshell, a brief outline of that. And I know most of you have probably heard some of the horror stories and things that we've been facing over the last few years. But I want to move now into just understanding some more culture and some of the teachings and some of the really good things. And so you'll always hear about, you may not always hear about it, but the seven sacred teachings. And these are them right here. So we have love, truth, respect, humility, honesty, courage, and wisdom. And those are seven really great things to live by and to practice on a daily basis and be reminded of. And with each one, it's connected to an animal. We can go to the next slide. Thanks. Next slide there, please. That's great. The medicine wheel, some of you may have heard, some may not. We're not going to go through the whole thing in detail, but the medicine wheel was sort of if you Google medicine wheel, you may have a hard time coming up with the same thing twice. This is sort of a new age uh, way of living, but I'll explain it to you. If we look at things as a wheel, we know that wheels spin and roll along quite nicely. And so those four quadrants there, you may see a lot more commonly, that physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional, those four quadrants. And the whole idea is being balanced, right? So having your whole life sort of spread between those four things. If you put everything in your life into your uh, uh, spiritual, uh, that if that works for you, that's great. But you're going to find that things are going to roll along quite nicely. So balancing it out in the four quadrants, and each section represents something different in terms of different colors, animals, the seasons, and the directions. But yeah, the medicine wheel, we used to do a lot of workshops around, because it's easier to explain, and especially for young folks, when we were doing workshops in person, we had, and not just with the youth, we've done it with adults too, but creating their own medicine wheel. There was an elder by the name of Billy Lewis who just passed. He used to explain, Mi'kmaq culture as being, he said, it's so easy, and he goes, it's all about what works for you. Uh, and if that's what you believe and that gets you through the day, that's great. It only becomes something different when somebody challenges that for you. But he said, the culture and the teachings is how it works for you, what gets you through the day, and what anybody else says really doesn't matter. Next slide, please. So the eagle feather. Why is the eagle so significant? The eagle flies the highest and is said to have touched the face of the Great Spirit. Like all ceremonial objects, the eagle feather is treated with the utmost respect. Those who carry eagle feathers or claws, they're highly respected. And to receive an eagle feather is uh, a, a person has contributed to his or her community unselfishly, to the betterment of his or her community. Uh, you know, some days you could be walking through the woods, you might find an eagle feather. Some days you could be standing right under an eagle's nest and not find one. And my elders used to say, was you receive those eagle feathers uh, when you need them, or when you're supposed to receive them. Next slide, please. So some ceremonies here. We're going to cover there's smudging, sweat lodge, healing circles. We'll talk a little bit about traditional healers and elders, and powwows. Again, it's difficult for me where I can't see anybody. So if I ask, has anyone attended a powwow, or anybody had a chance to experience this amazing event? It's really, it's something. If you haven't, you should try to get out there and go. They're very, very welcoming. Great. I think, yeah, I think the last one, I think Acadia First Nation just had the last one. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if Gold River is coming to, if they've had theirs or not. But I can send you the powwow trail to the listings of where they are. That's great. Okay, so smudging. So smudging is a ceremony that's traditionally practiced by Indigenous cultures to spiritually or physically purify and or cleanse negative feelings or energy or thoughts from a place or a person. Um, oh, that's too sad about the Gold River powwow. They had too much rain. The smudging is something that I do every day. It really is calming. But the sacred medicines are used during a smudging ceremony. And there's four sacred medicines. We're going to touch on those a little bit further in the presentation here. But we do use sage, sweetgrass, cedar, and tobacco. Some just use sage. Um, however, and they're all burnt in an abalone shell. And what happens is that the individual um, puts the medicine in the abalone shell, they light it. It smolders, it catches fire, but then it just sort of smolders, and it makes this wonderful smoke. Um, and the smoke from those medicines then carries it to their body, right? The healing, especially to the areas that need spiritual healing. So their mind, their heart, their arms, their legs, for their ears, mouth. Smudging is a very, very calming effect, right? We always have elders present at any conferences that we hold, because it has the ability to just calm somebody down. And that's what the elders that's one of the things that they're present for, is to help if emotions get out of hand. Next slide. Sweat lodge. So the sweat lodge is a traditional ceremony. It's it's carried out by Indigenous people. They refer to it as a sweat. They're going to have a sweat tonight. Um, and it's for healing purposes. It's considered a ceremony of spiritual cleansing. And the whole sweat lodge, like you see the lodge there, it has branches that are all tied together by ribbons, and each ribbon means something, and each pole uh they all represent something within the sweat lodge, even right down to the fire itself. And if you see the fire there in that picture that's sort of right in front of the door, there's an umbilical cord between that fire and that sweat lodge, and they heat up the grandfathers, these stones, and they're carried inside the sweat lodge, to which they then take cedar boughs and dip in water and put some water, which creates steam. So it's like a heavy duty sauna, and they get hot in there, because that's why you don't want to have any jewelry or anything on that, because that heat will go right to it, and could end up burning you. We've been holding cultural gatherings for youth for 15 years since I've been involved, and the youth, they get really excited about the sweats, but when you're in there, we try not to, you know, try to ask the person that's conducting the sweat lodge to just go a little bit easier on the youth, maybe not make it too hot, because I've seen people just pass out, or have to lay really close to the ground. Um, but when they come out of the sweat lodge, uh, they're so you just feel so clean and so uh, refreshed, even though you're exhausted emotionally. It's a good feeling coming out of there. Uh, I talked about the grandfathers, which they're heated. Um, and depending on who's conducting the sweat, some use different numbers of grandfathers. We can go to the next slide. So, talking circles, you may have heard people use this term before. There's a lot of research out there now that's being done, that people felt they were being a little bit sneaky around ethics, and instead of calling them focus groups, started calling them talking circles, um, which caused some issues for the research projects down the road, because it was still research. But talking circles are a really great way. Oh, there's a question. Sorry, I'm just going to go back there. Are sweat lodges open to the greater public, or is there a way to experience one locally? Great question. Sweat lodges are open to anybody, and any Indigenous person out there would be happy to have somebody who is not Indigenous attend one. They are very, very enlightening, I guess you could say, if it's your first time, you've never been to one. It really is a great experience. We don't, we we had one out in Cole Harbor. Um, I don't know of any local to Halifax right now. I know of a gentleman that's trying to work on um, getting some sweat lodges, but there's trying to write some grants and get some, some travel for people to be able to attend them. Um, the Eastern Shore, I'm trying to think. I know the Stone Bear Tracks and Trails. It was a former chief, Frank Muse, who takes care of the land down there. I don't know if he's doing regular sweat lodges down there, but let me there isn't one. I don't believe the one in Cole Harbor is still there. Somebody had passed away that was sort of involved with those heavily. Um, yeah, yeah, Stone Bear. We used to do a gathering at Stone Bear Tracks and Trails every year, and we used to invite people outside of Indigenous organizations to attend these cultural retreats, and it was really, they were a lot of fun. They were they helped a lot of people. We got a lot of education around there, but we just we ran out of money. We weren't able to, and so we were putting that money back into youth and letting them. So a lot of people think that the youth all have access to culture, or they because they live in a community, they're traditional, and that's not the case. We have actually more people living outside of communities. Um, but yes, I will find out, and I'll get the information over to the team at Digital Nova Scotia and find out where the sweats are. I know at the powwows in the summertime, you'll quite often you'll find them doing sweats. You can contact the health center, the cultural coordinator at any health center within the community. They could help you find out where they would have sweats. Perfect. So talking circles. Talking circles allow everybody to have a chance to speak. And quite often um, they'll have a talking stick or a talking stone. And as you go around the circle, as long as that person has that, when they have possession of this stone or sticks or a talking stick, nobody else should be talking, right? We as humans, we do a lot of interrupting, I guess. Um, I used to talk a lot about listening and how it's a learned skill, and that it's a difficult skill to master, the art of listening. We all have these ears that are on the side of our head, and we hear a lot, but we don't really listen a lot. And one of those examples is if you've ever met somebody and you said, "Hi, my name is Dave," and they say, "Hi, I'm Mary." But as I'm saying, "Hi, my name is Dave," the other person's already hearing themselves say, "Hi, my name is Mary," and they're not even listening to me. And 2 minutes later, they go, "Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. What was your name again?" We're talking seconds later that they've forgotten it. So we quite often, I think, are born um, listening, or we end up listening to respond, not to actually listen. Um, thank you for all of this great information here. That's great. Yeah, the health center, they'll be able to help you out. That's my little talk on listening. And that was sort of told to me probably, I don't know, 30 or 40 years ago. But I'm reminded of it every time I say to somebody, "How are you?" And I really listen to how they're doing. Don't ask somebody a question if you're not prepared to get the answer, I guess. There's some guidelines around talking circle. Only one person speaks at a time. Introduce yourself during the first round. Speak from the heart, and listen with respect. And what is said in those talking circles is kept in those talking circles. And a lot of people get frightened when they think they're going to be put on the spot or they have to talk. And um, they're rehearsing in their head what they're going to say when it's going to come their time to speak, and it's just something happens when they're handed that talking stick. It's like they can't even control what's going to come out of their mouth, and I think the words just come to people. It really is a great it's a great way to communicate. It teaches us so many things. Next slide. So traditional medicine healers, they have many different roles within the communities, providing social and spiritual support, determining the course of uh, an injury or an illness. Um, in the case of deaths, other, they're just they can be there to 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 calm you down, um, to remove evil influences that may be coursing the illness. Um, One thing that we were always taught about, and I think we could really, really learn a lot about this, especially I worked a lot in harm reduction for a lot of years. Uh, and all the efforts that people put forward in trying to help people in different certain situations, whether it's substances that they used, or anger, but we became too focused on trying to cure the illness or cure the disease when we really, I've been yelling it for quite some time. We need to focus more on healing the person. Uh, and so we see some of that now, uh, versus instead of trying to cure the disease, we heal the person. So we find out why people use substances, um, and tackle it that way, then maybe they won't use substances down the road. Um, I mean, we've seen that in a lot of different communities. Um, when we were having substance issues, uh, on how to tackle it around, some communities, and and kudos to them. Everyone is just doing the best that they can to make things better. But they were trying to push these drug dealers and stuff outside of the communities, and I think, in my opinion, I think if we had focused more on healing people, those drug dealers are going to go away because people aren't going to be using the substances. And so there was some pushback, and um, but again, in this big old world, we're doing the best that we can each day, and just trying to make things better with what we have. So don't fault anybody for anything ever, other than just trying to do the best that we can and to be able to protect community. Uh, so elders have a lot of characteristics that aid in providing care and healing, such as they share a common language with somebody. Patients have an expectation of relief from their healers. They know that they're going to be able to help them. There's usually, thank you, Paul. There's usually a strong relationship that already exists uh, between the patient and the healer. Uh, and a lot of people associate elders with being older, and that's not quite true. Yes, a lot of elders are older, um, but there are some young people that, to me, qualify as elders in their communities, the ones that are living that good life and a clean life, and trying to better the community and help out where they can, and gaining knowledge. engaging with elders. I mean, that's a big part. Um, is to get youth, and sorry I keep going back to youth, but I do a lot of work with youth uh, because they need as much support as they can get. But you know, trying to get people to engage with elders, it can be quite difficult. But I mean, I could sit there. I don't do much without talking to an elder. Um, because they may not always have the answer, but they can certainly calm me down so that I can see the picture a little bit more clearly. Um, but connecting those youth with the elders, that's why we had youth and elder retreats, because that importance around the knowledge that elders carry and keep, it's part of a person, and they are very, very knowledgeable. So, but they're not always elderly, I guess. Next slide, please. Just trying to read Paul's comment there real quick. No problem. What did I do here? Some others. We just covered a lot of this here. But yeah, I just covered all of this actually. And this picture right here is a picture of Alex Cope and William Duncan from Millbrook First Nations. But yeah, elders are considered to be leaders of the Indigenous communities who have gained the respect and trust of their kin, and they're rich in knowledge and wisdom in matters relating to their history, their culture, their traditions. They've lived it, they've seen it, and members of the Indigenous population turn to them for guidance. Uh, we're in everything's changing daily now. And so that's why it's so important that we engage elders with everything that we do, because they haven't seen things that we're dealing with these days around harm reduction, around gender, and it's all new. And I know that elders want to help and support, but if we don't engage them and bring them out to, to our sessions or events or webinars, it's very difficult for them to grasp what it is that we're dealing with on a daily basis out there. They want to be involved. They want to be, you know, they have a way of teaching and telling stories that it just sticks with you. Indigenous people are very graphic learners, so a lot of words and stuff it's difficult to sort of hang on to that. But if you listen to somebody tell the story and paint that beautiful picture of it, we use a lot of graphic facilitation now with conferences and gatherings because it's easy to absorb. Next slide. So powwow, Indigenous people getting together to join in dancing, visiting, renewing, sleeping over, renewing old friendships, making new ones. This is a time to renew thoughts of the old ways and to preserve the rich heritage. It's a really good, I can't explain it if you haven't been. It's just a feeling like no other, and very, very welcoming. These are open to everybody. So there's a question around how elders become the role. It just goes back to, I'm just going to back up to the elder part there, sorry. Around, doing the work within the community and living that clean life, and the community recognizes them as elders. So kind of practicing what they preach, I guess, is a good way to look at it. So, when I say a good life or a clean life, not using substances and not, um, you know, really in it for the better of the community, and not just themselves. Um, You'll hear lots of drumming at powwows. Um, and that drum or that beat um, really represents the heartbeat of Mother Earth. Uh, I'm an emotional person. I don't know where that came from, but I tend to cry when I'm happy. I don't know if anybody else experienced that. So if I'm at a parade or a powwow or something, and music, I cry for some reason. I get emotional, and so at powwows, it's so powerful, and you hear the big drums, uh, not just the hand drums, but the really big drums. I people come up to me a lot to say, "Are you okay?" Or other people say, "Oh, we saw you at the powwow. Is everything okay? Everything good in your life?" And I'm like, obviously, those are happiness tears. Try to stay away from parades and stuff now because it's it's a lot. And the older I get, the more I cry about happy things. Next slide, please. These are the four medicines. We touched on them a little bit earlier, but tobacco, sweetgrass, cedar, and sage. Those are the four main ones that you'll see. And I had mentioned some people burn all of them when they smudge. Some people just burn sage. Um, and then we'll go to the next slide there and we'll touch on each one a little bit. Tobacco, and it's used as an offering for everything. And in every ceremony, you'll see offerings. If I'm asking something from an elder, I always offer them tobacco. Um, People will tell you if they're cutting things down out in the woods, they'll make an offering of tobacco. It's in exchange. Traditional tobacco was given to us so that we can communicate with the spirit world. It opens up the door to allow that communication to take place. Uh, I did a lot of workshops around tobacco, traditional tobacco, versus smoking tobacco or commercialized tobacco. Um, and there's still some out there. One of my name comes to mind is Marion Francis. I, I'm a smoker. And she saw me, I can't remember where it was, but she went up one side of me and down the other. She will yell at everybody that she sees smoking, and good on her, because she said it's not for smoking that way, the way that you're smoking it. It's a powerful and very respected medicine, and it should be used as such. So it has special relationship to other plants. It's said to be the main activator of all the plant spirits. And when you seek the help and advice from an elder, healer, or medicine person, they give you give your offering of tobacco. They know that it's a request and may be made uh, as maybe made because tobacco is so sacred. Next slide, please. Sweetgrass, it's the sacred hair of Mother Earth. It's got a really sweet aroma, reminds people of the gentleness, the love, and the kindness that Mother Earth has for people. And when sweetgrass is used in a healing circle, it has a calming effect. And it says the sweet smell attracts those spirits. Um, and like sage and cedar, sweetgrass is used for smudging and purification. We have some of the largest areas where you can pick sweetgrass. And I've been once to pick sweetgrass. It was a great experience. I've also gone out on my own to try to find it. And I couldn't find it. I walked all day trying to find sweetgrass and I couldn't. And again, my elder at that point said, "You weren't supposed to have it that day." It'll only present itself when you need it. Next slide, please. Cedar, this is used to purify the home. It has many restorative medicinal uses. Cedar baths are healing. When cedar is put in the fire with tobacco, it crackles and snaps. And when it does this, it's calling the attention of the spirits to that offering that's being made at that time. And cedar is used in fasting, in sweat lodge ceremonies. I mentioned they have it sort of bundled together too, also in the sweat lodges, to put water on the stones of the grandfathers. But it also gives that it's a form of protection. Cedar branches cover the floor of the sweat lodges also, and a circle of cedar surrounds the faster's lodge. I can't remember who said they were down at Stone Bear Tracks and Trails, but Frank Muse, who was the former chief down there, he's got quite a sense of humor. But the youth would come out of the sweat and they would have these cedar bits all over them, and because you're sweating, everything sticks to you. And so we used to talk about the kids coming out looking like a piece of shake and bake chicken when they come out of the sweats. Oh, next slide, please. Sage, that's used to prepare people for ceremonies, teachings, because it's more medicinal and stronger than sweetgrass. It tends to be used more often in ceremonies. Sage is used for releasing what is troubling the mind, and for removing, I don't know if you guys can hear that. There's a blue jay outside of my window losing his mind. For removing that negative energy. It's also used for cleansing homes, sacred items, and it does have other medicinal uses. There's male sage and there's female sage, and there's actually sea sage and buffalo sage. That's true. It's a little lesson on sage. But it smells so good. It really does. Even just, I'm having a tough day. If I just, even just smelling the sage without even lighting it or smudging has a calming effect for me. Next slide. Touch a little bit on health now. Does anybody have any questions around traditional, the medicines or the powwows? Any questions there from anybody? Oh, we got some. No questions? All right. We'll let you think them up and we can always come back to them at the end. So certain diseases are more prevalent in Indigenous population compared to Canada's general population. Type 2 diabetes is 3 to 5 times higher. Heart disease is 1.5 times higher than in non-Indigenous communities. Tuberculosis is 8 to 10 times higher. I still shocked, I think, that people are still dying from tuberculosis when it's so easily curable. The number one cause of death among First Nations is injury and poisoning, with suicide rate of 22% among youth ages 10 to 19 and 16% among those aged 20 to 44 years. That's disturbing that the rates are that much higher. Oh, next slide, please. I keep trying to advance my own slide. That's what that beep is. HIV and AIDS, they're 7 times higher in Indigenous populations than mainstream society. 2 Indigenous people a day contract HIV in Canada. That's, I mean, 1 person anywhere is too much, but and then with hepatitis C in Indigenous, it's 7 to 10 times higher than in non-Indigenous folks. You see higher alcoholism, a higher drug addiction, a higher infant mortality, and a higher teen pregnancy. Uh, I used to be known as the condom guy in Atlantic Canada. I supplied all the health centers in communities with condoms, and one of the biggest things was like trying to normalize condoms. Like if we don't normalize them, of course, kids are going to blow them up and laugh at them and carry on with them. But when I looked at the teen pregnancy back, this is way, you know, over 15 years ago, but I wasn't allowed to just distribute condoms within the high school, um, because the youth would make a mess out of them, and they would take them out of the packages and, like I said, blow them up. Uh, but the high schools, they were the first ones that called me and talk about teen pregnancy. And I remember going, "We need to fix this." Because if I was allowed to put condoms in the schools, we might not have many teen pregnancies. Next slide, please. So today, 33 First Nation communities in Atlantic Canada. There's an organization called Healing Our Nations that serves 33 out of 38 communities. So in New Brunswick, there's 15, Nova Scotia, 13, Prince Edward Island, 2, Newfoundland and Labrador, 8. There are 20,000, sorry, so Healing Our Nations, they actually, they started out as the Atlantic AIDS Task Force. A couple of people went to a conference and they learned that Indigenous people were contracting HIV and dying with AIDS. And so they started this task force and they grew over the years. And I worked a lot of years with that organization, and I saw the good that they actually do within the community and educating people. And they're really the only organization of its kind in Atlantic Canada, and they handle all of Atlantic. And so those relationships that they've built with the community are very, very important because a lot of people look to them for guidance. There's 20,000 Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people living in Atlantic Canada, 5,000 Inuit living in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, and Northwest River in Labrador. So way north. Beautiful area up there. That's the Innu, sorry, people. Next slide, please. So today, where are we at today? Learning. So learning through experience, and we spoke about storytelling and having that visual picture, that graphic facilitation. Health concerns, still diabetes, alcohol, and drugs or substances, teen pregnancy, HIV and AIDS, hepatitis C, suicide. Some other concerns is poverty and lack of education, prevention, and lack of support. Healing, getting back to that now with the powwows and the sweat lodges and the smudges, and using those sacred medicines and making them available. A lot of the work that I used to do was not forcing culture and medicines on people, but just making it available. It's nice to have options in life, and if you don't not aware of things, how do you determine what works best for you if you don't have your options there? So a lot of the work that I did was just making culture available to people, and or I guess being that toolbox, being able to put all these tools out there for people to experience, and be able to use whatever might help them through in their life. If they don't use cultural or those tools or those medicines, then that's their decision. But being able to be offered that is, I think, is very, very important. So if we look at non-Indigenous organizations, and how do we work better with First Nations people? Well, we need to learn about them and offer things that are relevant to them or culturally specific. There's a lot of companies and stuff in the past that said, how do I, just how do I be a little bit more aware, or how do I let people know that I care? And I think one of the really good things with the LGBTQ2SI communities, they put rainbows, flags, and stickers. Um, so there's nothing wrong with putting a greatest wheatgrass over your door, or just something that First Nation person would look at it, maybe feel a little bit more calm, or that people are aware. You don't have to know everything about First Nation, but just that that extra effort is there. Next slide. Oh, wow. That's it. So I'm gonna open it to, can we open it to questions? We scheduled for an hour or an hour and a half, I can't remember.
An hour and a half. So we do have some time for questions.
Well, boy, that's the first time that I've ever gotten through anything in an hour. I think it has to do with not being in real life or in present.
So folks, just again, you can feel free to use the raise hand feature, and I will unmute you if you'd rather do that than to type into the chat or Q&A bar.
Must have covered all the bases.
Looks like it.
Usually conversations are pretty rich, and
Yeah.
you're welcome, Susan. I hope everybody learned something today. I think, Billy Lewis said it the best, like Indigenous culture is what you make of it and how it works for you and how you can use it to get yourself through your daily life. But I think one of the big things about getting through life and in a good way is just being kind to people. I don't think, we take a lot of things for granted when we say things like, I love you. And we need to hear that. So I challenge you all to tell somebody today that you may think that they know that you love them, but tell them that you love them and say their name. Because we've got a lot going on out there, and we have a lot of youth that don't hear that very often. And it's nice. It's a good reminder. This question here. Hoping to find an Indigenous leader who could teach a ceremonial craft in a conference setting. Would you have any contacts? Yes. So if you want to do, there's drum. I mean, that's a little pricey, depending on how many people. Drum making. There's a really good story about the drum and how that plays into people's lives. But Brian Knockwood is a name if you want to jot that name down. He's from Indian Brook First Nations. He does a lot of cultural crafts. Pardon me. Truth and Reconciliation Committee is part of my inviting your neighbors to join. Any recommendations or insights on making that invite? Ashley, I'd love to connect with you through email. We can talk a little bit. Yeah. Oh, this is recorded. I'll get the recording. Perfect. I don't. That's a good question around the books. Do I know any good books that I can share do's and don'ts when communicating? I don't really know. I don't know if there is books. I mean, I mean, I don't know. I'll find out for you though, Maria. One thing that I will say though, be very, very careful when you're Googling things, because old Dr. Google screws up every once in a while. And, but you can find a lot of really good stuff online. I mean, the thing is if you're working within the Indigenous communities, ask. just talk to people and engage the people within the community, to like those elders or those line workers, and they'll make sure everything runs along smoothly. Just trying to back up here a little bit. I work at a cultural heritage site. Ooh, now the questions are coming. I work at a cultural heritage site of the Eastern Shore in the Nova Scotia, but I work to developing relations with today's communities in Ontario. I would like to learn more about Mi'kmaq presence along the same areas of watershed and support cultural events. Groups or individuals to start with. Whoa, there's so many out there, Michelle. That, but I think a good place to start is, you know, with the health center. I mean, they really. I know when we hear health center, think health, right? But we think medicine, right? But these health centers that are in these communities, they handle everything from cultural retreats to all of that. So I think a lot of yes, Brian Knockwood was the name for drum making. But I think checking in with the cultural coordinators at the health center is very, very helpful. But there's different departments within Indigenous Services Canada, and even the Public Health Agency of Canada or the province. Usually have liaisons or somebody that you can speak to there, or you can talk to Healing Our Nations. There's another national organization called Communities, Alliances and Networks, formerly the Canadian Aboriginal AIDS Network. Yeah, and if it's more specific, you can ask me. I know a few people out there. What would be considered an inappropriate gift or gesture, and vice versa? Um, you stumped me. You stumped me there, Maria. I think, you know, just something from your heart, right? I guess this is a good gift. I mean, money's always not kidding. Um, yeah, like I tend to gift like something that was handmade or crafted within my home, right? Uh, I give gifts. But the main important piece is that you should always gift that elder with tobacco. And that's really very simple. Um, I can get you Brian Knockwood's info. There's another fella in Millbrook. His name is Garrett Lode. He does drum working workshops also, and rattles, hand rattles. That was a fun exercise. There's some, yeah, there's lots of people out there. But I'd call the organizations locally and just say, hey, who do you use? I've given you a couple of names there, because there are other people out there that maybe you're doing it for wrong reasons, I guess. But what sort of things do you think we as employers could look to bring into our day-to-day that would be more inclusive of many Indigenous cultures we may have in our workforce on a regular basis? So it's not a 1 week, a year sort of thing. It takes on more significant meaning and lasting impact. Put policies in place within your workforce. Smudging is a part of a lot of Indigenous people's daily lives, and so making those things available, just like other cultures, people pray, for an hour a day, and we make that available to them, and so I think we can do that for everybody. At the end of the day, we only do what we want to do, right? And I think the more education that we put out there and the more information that we give people, the more they're going to want to do, because if that makes any sense. But employers, yeah, just make that stuff available. Make it known that you understand. You don't have to know everything about Indigenous people, but just that awareness, that cultural awareness, that there are different protocols. I remember when we went through COVID, the COVID. That's funny. But I had people consulting with me, like, how do we set up these COVID uh, vaccines within Indigenous communities, and how do we make sure that we're coming into people's homes in a good way and a respectful way. And I get it. There's a lot of uh, there's a lot to think about when we're doing things like that. But I think one of the main things with Indigenous people, yes, be aware of some of the things, and you have some more today that you're aware of, but ask. That is the biggest thing. Uh, is to just ask. There's nothing wrong with asking an Indigenous person, like, what do you need? Like, what would, there's all kinds of research studies going on. But I mean, I feel like Mi'kmaq people here or everywhere have been researched to death. But I think just being a human being and not assuming that you know what's best for them, because that didn't work out before. So, um, anyone providing language training? Yeah, so the Friendship Center has language classes, I believe, that are there. I took, oh my gosh, my brain is so full of other information, but I really wanted to learn to speak Mi'kmaq, so I took 2 years of language classes with Tom Christmas at the Friendship Center. The only word that stayed with me was Winjuzabegan, which is turnip. It's not a very useful word. After 2 years, it's hard to learn. But yeah, check with the Friendship Center. They'd be happy to direct you in the direction of taking some language classes. There's an app that you can download, the Ilnu app, on your phone. You can type in a word and it'll say back to you in Mi'kmaq. But yeah, and a lot of the courses at the Friendship Center are free. So utilize them. They're happy to have people come in and learn. Cape Breton University too, I think Duma Young used to at one point teach language up there. I don't know who's teaching it now through Cape Breton University. Yeah, it can be hard. I think of like the Mi'kmaq Friendship Center, that should be your main go to for anything if you have a question. And you can come to me if you like with any question. I don't know all those answers, but I do know a lot of people and be able to steer you in the right direction. And happy to do that. So yeah. So hopefully you all learned something today. If you walked away with one thing, I'm happy. If you walked away with two things, that's great. Walked away with three things, you can pay me. No, I'm just kidding.
Someone is asking if you could share your contact info.
Sure. Type in the chat here.
Oh.
Yep.
Okay. There's the message in there, and I'll just also include it, if you don't mind, in our follow-up email as
Perfect.
well, if anyone wants to reach out. Thank you so much for such an informative session. And I think just from the response here, you can see that people learned a lot and it is continued learning. So folks, please do continue to reach out or ask any questions if you have any after the fact. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.